Hey, well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Looking Both Ways podcast. I am Pastor Tim, your host, alongside Pastor Rich, the fearless leader, one of the fearless leaders. I guess Sunday was way more exciting than any of us anticipated. If looking back at last Sunday, starting the day, how many baptisms did we have planned?
We had 2 planned because there was a couple that weren't going to be able to do it because of some other issues. But then as the day unfolded, we went from 2 to 6.
I was going to say 6 or 7.
And but 4 of those were not planned.
Yeah. No, it was awesome. And some of those happened in service. Some of those happened at Koinonia night, which was also just really special. If you missed that, oh man, come to the next one. Those are really, really special nights. We got to hear from the choir. We got to hear, obviously, the 2 worship teams. We had the whole room on their knees in prayer. We got to celebrate their baptism. We got to eat some delicious food. So just an incredible night, an incredible Sunday. Mm-hmm. And so as we look back, man, if you want to test, whether or not a ministry is growing, I think that's a good test of that, because it was a pretty incredible night.
Well, Koinonia night for me, as I say all the time, is my favorite. Well, there's a lot of favorites, but I enjoy it so much because it's really it's the picture of us being living hope in all of it, in all of who we are, the people who make it up, and the people who make up the church. And so to be able to gather in that Acts 2 model as we try and do with that is always to me a blessing, and it's always a blessing for me to see everybody mixing and together and do that. I was talking with a younger couple that goes to the Spanish ministry that have started coming, and they were talking to me about it at dinner, about how unique what we're trying to do is, and appreciate the level of unity is their word, and relationship that we see. We communicate well when we gather together to do the things that we do. So for them, that was a unique. It was our first Koinonia night. So I love that. I mean, I always ask as if this is your first. And man, there was a lot of people on Sunday night. This was their first Koinonia night, because we've been doing these now for several years.
Yeah.
And so that's always exciting to me to see new people say, hey, this is my first one. And that's their taste of what we're trying to accomplish as a church.
Yeah, well, and, we kind of hearkened back to the very first time we did a mashup. The song that I chose for our mashup, which was Rise Up Lazarus, that was the very first mashup we ever did, Spanish-English choir. And so it was kind of fun to kind of bring that back up, realize how long ago that was, but then also get to do that together and have our fingers falling off and voices failing by the end of the night. That's a good testament. It doesn't necessarily mean the worship happened, but for those that were worshiping completely, man, it showed. There was definitely evidence.
And that's totally true. But I can tell you this, from the front where I sat this time, I can say, for me, honestly, it was the most I've heard people singing behind me, to where for me, I could tangibly hear them separately from hearing what's on the stage, because obviously right there on the front row you kind of get both with that. But you could hear, especially when we did the choral stuff, which invites itself to being able to hear congregation more. That was cool. People singing is important to the stage. It's important to everybody in the room when we all sing together.
Yeah, well, and I mean, as we look forward, just as a church, we've kind of expanded, the little slogans of who we are. We've said two languages, one church, 2 languages, right? And and I just got to talk with someone yesterday from our 8:30 service, and really we have 3 demographics in our church. We have, the senior community, we have Spanish, and we have English. And so really that has become what you'll see on our website, which is 3 traditions, 2 languages, 1 church. And, we have that kind of 3-2-1 model, and I think that's what was so special about Sunday night was you had the choir there, and I don't remember who I was talking to, but maybe it was you telling me about what Jerry actually said about, having the choir up there. They didn't have all of their people, so it wasn't a very big choir, but he said, yeah, but I've got, 120 other voices joining with us, and so, that's why it sounded the way it did, because everybody was singing and worshiping in all ages, multiple languages. It was just an incredible night.
And that's not even the biggest one we do. Our biggest one's coming up, looking ahead to the Sunday before Thanksgiving is our next one. And our Thanksgiving one always seems to be the largest one we do all year. With the way we're eating meat in this church right now, we might have to break the record on pounds of turkey we can have to get cooked for the times together.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we ran out of food for this one, so I mean, you better believe if we have a Thanksgiving one, we might have a good problem on our hands as we head into the fall. Oh my gosh, I think especially for me on a media side, this week has been crazy, whether it's the new sermon series that we've got coming up this week, which we'll talk about here in a minute, or fall festival that we've got to get going, or harvest festival that we got to get going, or the youth going to Peak, and the men's camp out that we've got coming up, and Rooted that's going to be starting in September. Man, all of that stuff that we've got coming out in the fall, man, we just came out of that sabbatical, and good thing we're all rested, because we've got some work ahead of us.
Well, yeah, and beyond the other normal routines of life and things that are plowing and taking up way more of our time than we want it to as well. But yeah, I'm actually really looking forward and want to encourage everybody to do Rooted. And even if you've done the first iteration before, we will have a couple tracks with some of the other studies that they have to do that. But for all the people who've never done Rooted, I just want to strongly encourage them to be a part of it. We're really trying to instill that into the life of our church, especially for those who want to go beyond and serve and just get it's really become it's the basics. It's rooted. The title is fitting to do that, and it's really the material you get is good. It's a good process to learn some of the basics. You can't cover everything in 10 weeks, but you can try and cover as much as you can to lay a groundwork. But more than that, it's the relationships that you build within the group, which is what it really is all about as we come together as a church family.
Well, and I think it definitely causes the growing and stretching within our church. I think since we did Rooted for the first time this past spring, we've seen a lot of growth. We've seen a lot more people stepping up to serve in ministry, and I think that was evident when we did VBS. Of just the amount of people that were coming out to help with those kinds of things. And so I think it is a culture shifter. And even looking back on Sunday, it definitely goes back to the basics. And so even if you have been a Christian for 1,000 years, you can still get a lot out of Rooted, because it reminds you of those fundamentals of your faith, and it puts your faith back in perspective, which sometimes I think we can lose the longer we walk with Christ. Even if you look at Revelation, one of the issues that the seven churches was having was that they had forgotten their first love, right? So whether you are a new Christian, or maybe you're not a Christian and you just want to learn more, or you've been a Christian for a long time, I do think that it is an incredible study that really helps make sure that your faith is put into perspective, and it's very practical as well in terms of how you actually walk with Christ and live out your faith.
Well, and not only that, but for those who feel like the material is too basic for them, I've had that said to me a couple of times. It's not really it's not really about that when it comes to that. It's really about, what about the person whose group you may be in, for whom it's brand new, for whom they don't have a premise on which to build, because they're building it now. And that's where your value comes in, to look past whatever you determine to be basic or whatever, and to say, hey, you know what, but I'm here, and it's a review for me, but maybe I'm helping somebody else who isn't quite where I'm at when it comes to this, and help them along. It's really discipleship in that basic one-on-one or in a group context.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're looking back on Sunday, I mean, Koinonia night, that definitely takes, a lot of focus of just the blessings that Sunday was. And even those that partook in fasting, I know I did. And so I was very ready when it was time to eat. And in fact, I think one of the neatest things is we were fasting, but we still wanted our lunch crew to get together. And so we had a fasting wheel where we all just went to Starbucks, the new Starbucks where Tanyan was, and we all just kind of sat and talked for a couple of hours before we went back to the church. So, just kind of craving that community and all those replacing the food with the fellowship, and not losing that just because we weren't eating. But I think one of the coolest parts about Sunday is what we started talking about, which was baptism. And really what that was born out of was, a sermon on baptism, because we just finished our Nehemiah series and we're starting our new series, no pun intended. We're starting our new series called New this coming Sunday. And so for this week, we kind of took that break and went back to the fundamentals and talked about baptism and to see the response. I mean, how did you feel getting up there and kind of just communicating what baptism is, and then actually see that response from the church that you lead? How did that kind of hit you?
Well, it's an affirmation that we're doing something God wanted us to do. It's good to do that. The idea actually came more from Pastor Carlos than me, and you guys, just to do it. I'm like, because he was going to take that 1 week break that we had in our calendar and do that. I was like, well, I can do the same thing, and we will just be that way. We're just on the same page in both services, or all the church family for that. It's never a bad thing to review the basics of why we do what we do. And baptism is something that in our community we have a lot of different faith traditions and a lot of different meetings from the people around us and the people who come into our church. And so to explain to it what it is, and also to try and deal with some of the maybe not theological reasons people don't, but just some of the more practical reasons people don't. Which for me as a Baptist, for my whole Christian journey, it's just those arguments just have always kind of shocked me a little bit. I mean, I get being afraid of water and having to navigate that, and certainly I've done that in my lifetime. But to sit there and say baptism doesn't save, which it doesn't, so I don't need to be baptized, is an inconsistent way of looking at it. Because as we talked about, it's what Jesus did. And so to be able to just understand, okay, if we're going to be a follower of Jesus, this is what he did. We want to follow that. And it's really that simple. And we're just telling the world who we are. It is our public confession of faith according to Scripture. And we talked a lot about that too. So it was always cool. Just a QR code, and the QR code, putting a QR code up and letting people decide. And there's a couple people I already know, then you I think already know as well, that responded as well. They couldn't do it Sunday night, but we got them on our little whiteboard in the office, and they got there for the next couple of weeks as well. So that's the great thing when God moves and when God brings conviction. We don't have the authority or the power to do that. God's the one who brings conviction to people to say, I need to do this. Absolutely.
Well, and we set our number, which I really valued that time that you, Carlos, and I got to kind of step away and really talk about this year that honestly is starting to come to, we're in the last quarter of the year now, and we're coming into the end of that. And now it's all of a sudden time to start talking about 2025. But in the midst of that, I think we set that goal and of 30 baptisms, and you can say what you want about numbers, but like you've said before, numbers are people, and that is evidence of what's happening in our church. And what I think is so incredible about it's looking like we're going to get to that number, and maybe even go above that as God continues to move. But what I think is so incredible about the baptisms that we've seen this year, and maybe you can speak to this, nothing has seemed forced. In order to influence that number, everything has seemed organic and really genuine as we've seen people baptized throughout the year. It's easy to set a goal and then just force it so that way you can hit that goal. But I don't feel like we haven't really done anything extra to try and influence that. I just do believe that it's a testament of what's happening, what God's doing in our church.
Right. The only thing I would say that is what I've tried to do this year, for me personally, is to be more intentional in the messages on Sunday morning about that invitation time. And I'm still not where I want to be with that. And there's just, as you know, we just have a lot of moving parts on Sunday morning to try and work to go from one thing to the next. And so I've tried to be more intentional about that. We did do Vacation Bible School this year. That was another intentional kind of thing to kind of just reach out and to bring it in front of people. But you're right. It hasn't been because of any type of intentional programming beyond just praying for God to move and to wrestle in the hearts of people, and being able to share the gospel at any opportunity I get, especially in front of people on Sunday morning. But yeah, we haven't gone out and done the programmatic aspect of it, and and that doesn't say that we shouldn't do those things, because we certainly have things that we want to do that go and reach out to people. But invitation is, people come to church mostly because people invite them. That's been true for, ever since I've been in ministry, and even before that. People primarily come to church through the invitation of other people. And so what I've noticed in our 101 class, especially our last one, I went around the room and I just asked, how did you come to the church? And man, of the 15 people in the room, if I remember correctly, 10 of them were invited. And so that's being invitational and just trying to keep those things in front of us and inviting people to do that. So you're right. It hasn't been forced. I don't even know if that's the right word to use. Coerced. That's not even a good, we haven't tried to coerce anybody into doing it. It's just doing things to help people grow in their faith and being open to the opportunities that God gives us. Yeah,
well, and the thing to remember too is that if it's not something that's done by God, if you're not praying for those kinds of things to happen, then they might as well just not happen. And I think, you can lean into the emotional side where you say, we're going to lower the lights and we're going to have the fog machine and we're going to do all of these things to try and manipulate people emotionally to do those things. But that's, I think, what I meant by not being forced or tried to, influence that. It's just kind of happened. And then here we are looking back at what God has done, which is one of the beauties of sabbatical. And, I think, again, like when we think about that sabbatical season, I think there was a lot of fear of, oh no, like what's going to happen to our church? Are people going to leave? That kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden we come back and we see a Sunday with 6 baptisms, and 4 of them came out of nowhere, and a massive night of worship with people eating food. And I think God used that. I think that's the evidence that God used that sabbatical in a good way. Right. And I think that's something to get excited about if you're part of our ministry here.
And I think that's all because during the sabbatical, one of the things we talked about in the sabbatical, or I tried to talk about as we've talked about it, was to there was the time of aloneness, isolation, and rest, but it was also talking about putting yourself in relationships or reestablishing relationships with people who refresh you, because part of rest is refreshing and builds you up, and to do that. And so for like our leaders, they got opportunity to go hang with people who refresh them. Instead of being in their ministry setting, doing what they do faithfully every week and emptying themselves, they got to actually fill themselves because of the relationship they had. As I look back on it, you just see that across the board with the people, even with the one Sunday school class that did meet during the sabbatical. That's what they are refreshed and fed by that, because for a lot of them, and it's an older group, that is what feeds them and refreshes them. And that's kind of what a sabbatical is about. So as I've looked back on it, it's like, it's people got to stay connected or reconnect and get filled. And that gave them the energy and the to go to the next one. And they probably can't wait for the next one now when they get to do the same thing, or to try and figure out how to incorporate that into their crazy life that they already have now.
I mean, absolutely. And the best part about anything, and I was just talking to a gentleman yesterday about this in our church. He came into my office and sat down, and I said, I think one of the most important things that we do here, that we try to do here, is what's called an after action, where we look at everything that we've done and we realize that perfection is impossible, which means everything can be improved. And so, whether it's VBS or the retreats that we do, or even this podcast, we have constantly asked the question, this is good, but it can be better, and how can it be better, right? And so, even next year, we know of things that can make that sabbatical season better, or make this podcast better. And because again, I think the two words that God has really brought to me for us as a ministry, and for the youth ministry for sure, is I want everything to be accessible, but effective, right? And I think there's a lot of things that are effective, but they might not be accessible. Is a massive men's retreat up in the mountains with a world-renowned speaker, is that effective? Absolutely. But if it's going to cost $700 and be 8 hours away during the week, that's not very accessible. And on the flip side, you have things that are accessible, but they're not really effective at all. And so I think for us, as we continue to kind of evaluate what we do every year and really wanting to be effective for what God's doing in our community, but then also make sure that things are accessible, I think that's what I love about Koinonia Nights. It is a testament to that. It is very effective, and it's accessible for all of our people as we move forward as a church. And even when we have to ask a lot of our volunteers, and ministry takes a lot, we also want to maintain that effectiveness in terms of making sure we're keeping that in perspective and seeking rest, and knowing that God's going to bring growth whether we're putting it on our backs or not. So it's an exciting season for us as a church, and as we look forward, I got to work on the sermon art for where we're going this coming week to finish out the year in the book of Ephesians, an extremely important book theologically, practically, especially when you look at who the church in Ephesus was when Paul was ministering to them, and it's a series called New. So go ahead and just kind of you don't have to sell the farm, but let us know what's the purpose of this series. Where does the name come from, and kind of where are we heading on Sunday?
Well, the idea of new for me is, well, one, I'm excited just because and I'll say this Sunday, if you ever ask me what my favorite book of the Bible is, it would be Ephesians. It's probably not even close when it comes to that. It just covers everything, and I'm always been captivated by John Stott's description of the Ephesians, of how it is Paul's vision of what Christianity is and what the church is. So it's a new humanity creating a new society that still lives within the realm of a godless and faithless world. And so it covers who we are in Christ. It covers the role of the church and what its purpose is. It covers how we're supposed to live in the context of ourselves as a church family, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, and how that's supposed to live out amongst in the world we live in. Ephesus was not your clean-cut city by any stretch of the imagination. Most of those letters that are written to large cities. Paul was a missiologist. He went to Ephesus for a reason. God led him, but the other side of that, Ephesus was this huge port city, and there was just a lot of things going on. And if you read the book of Acts, you know that he spent 3 years there. It was that important. He writes the letter from prison, but it was that important for him to establish Ephesus as a place for church. Sent Timothy up there after he was done. And so for me, Ephesians it covers the gospel, it covers God, it covers the church, and it covers how we're supposed to live. It's infinitely theological and infinitely practical, and it does it in 155 verses. And so that's pretty sharp. That's pretty efficient.
Yeah. Talk about effective.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, and there's a lot of things that came out of that. When you consider other letters that were written about people that were part of that ministry in Ephesus. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you as a church are looking forward to our new series, no pun intended. The series is called New. So again, be watching as we, if you ever miss anything, that's where we would love for you to lean into this podcast, the Looking Both Ways podcast, or on Mondays when we actually post the sermons. Obviously, in this video, you'll see the previous sermon linked always, so you can just click on that as you see it pop up every time we do this. But Rich, thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to another weekend with you as a church. Looking forward to tonight. As we are just continuing to come together in small groups, and as that's continuing to adjust, we're really exciting. We're really excited for what God's doing, and we're anticipating for Him to do more. So thanks again, Rich, and we'll see you all this coming Sunday.
Well, thank you guys, everybody. Have a great week. Hope to see you tonight, and if not, we'll see you Sunday.